A courtroom is the one place where everything finally catches up with you, and how people react in that moment tells you everything about who they actually are. Today, we are going through 15 of the most ruthless killers and exactly what happened when a judge put a number on what they did. Let's get into it. John Honoré. So Linda Fricky was 73 years old and had spent 28 years working as a life insurance agent in New Orleans. On the afternoon of March 21st, 2022, she was sitting in her silver Nissan SUV on Bienville Street in the Mid-City neighborhood when John Honoré, 17 years old, and 3 teenage girls approached the vehicle. Honoré pepper-sprayed Fricky directly in the face. Then he pulled her partially out of the car, punched her in the head, and stomped on her face after she fell to the ground. Then he got into the driver's seat and drove off. Fricky's arm had become tangled in her seatbelt. She was dragged alongside the moving vehicle for approximately 700 feet. That is roughly the length of 2 football fields. A neighbor watching from her front yard said she thought at first that the car was dragging a mannequin. Then she heard Fricky's voice saying, "Let me go." When Honoré drove over a curb and hit a utility pole, a cable severed Fricky's arm entirely from her body. Witnesses who ran to her said she was still conscious when they reached her. She did not survive. The entire thing was caught on surveillance footage. Honoré was 17 at the time. He had a prior violent crime allegation from when he was 15 that had been dropped by the district attorney's office. He and the 3 girls were all charged as adults with second-degree murder. The 3 girls pleaded guilty to attempted manslaughter and each received 20-year sentences. Honoré went to trial. His own defense attorney stood before the jury, acknowledged his client had done it, and asked them not to throw a young life away. The jury convicted him on November 27, 2023. After about 4 hours of deliberation. At the January 12, 2024 sentencing, Honoré told the court he would be home soon and that he loved his family. He was smirking when he said it. Judge Kimya Holmes imposed the mandatory sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Linda Fricky's sister-in-law, Kathy Richard, addressed Honoré directly and told him she hoped he would not make it out of there. Luis Bracamontes. And then there is Luis Bracamontes, who had already been deported from the United States twice before any of this happened. He first came in illegally in 1996, got arrested in Arizona on drug charges, spent 4 months in jail, and was deported in June of 1997. He came back, got arrested again in January of 1998 in Phoenix on more drug charges, and this time was released to federal immigration agents 3 days later without actually being deported. Then, in May of 2001, he was arrested in Maricopa County on marijuana charges and was deported a second time, 3 days later, and he came back again after that. By 2014, he was living in Salt Lake City under a fake name with his wife, Janelle Monroy. On the morning of October 24, 2014, Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Danny Oliver, 47 years old, pulled up to check on a vehicle sitting in the parking lot of a motel, 6 inches the Arden Arcade area of Sacramento. Bracamontes shot him in the forehead with a 9mm handgun. Oliver died almost immediately. Bracamontes then drove over Oliver's body on the way out of the parking lot. He and Monroy kept moving, carjacking vehicles as they went. At one point, Bracamontes shot a civilian named Anthony Holmes 5 times, including 3 times in the face, to steal his car. Holmes survived. They eventually made it to Placer County, where Bracamontes used an AR-15 style rifle to shoot Placer County Sheriff's Detective Michael Davis Jr., 42 years old. Davis was killed. His partner, Deputy Jeff Davis, was also shot and seriously wounded. Bracamontes was eventually taken into custody after barricading himself inside a house. His trial started in January 2018, and from day one, he was a problem. He yelled at witnesses. He called a law enforcement officer a coward during testimony. He screamed profanities at the families of the officers he had killed. He told the room his only regret was that he had not killed more. The jury convicted him in February on 15 felony counts. On April 25, 2018, Judge Steve White formally sentenced him to death. Bracamontes was removed from the courtroom during sentencing for yet another outburst. His wife Monroy had already been sentenced separately to 50 years to life. Markeith Lloyd. Sade Dixon was 24 years old, 3 months pregnant, and a mother of 2 boys, ages 8 and 2. On December 10, 2016, she moved back into her parents' home in Pine Hills, Orlando. She did not tell her family the full reason why. But she did tell them that her ex-boyfriend, Markeith Lloyd, had bitten her during a fight badly enough that she had to go get a tetanus shot. 3 days later, on December 13th, Lloyd showed up at the house. Witnesses heard around 10 gunshots. Sade was shot and killed outside the front door. Her unborn baby died too. Her 26-year-old brother, Ronald Stewart, ran outside to help her and was shot in the chest, right thigh, and left thigh. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition, but he recovered. 11 shell casings were found scattered from the front lawn all the way to the street. Police knew Lloyd had done it. He had been arrested around 20 times in Orange County between 1994 and 2016, with multiple convictions, including first-degree battery. But now he was gone, and a statewide manhunt began. Then, on the morning of January 9th, 2017, Orlando Police Master Sergeant Deborah Clayton, 42 years old, was leaving a Walmart on John Young Parkway when another customer recognized Lloyd standing in the checkout line and alerted her. Clayton moved to confront him. Lloyd opened fire. Both of them fired 8 rounds. Clayton was shot and killed. She was pronounced dead at 7:40 in the morning. Lloyd fled on foot. During the 9-day manhunt that followed, Orange County Sheriff's Deputy Norman Lewis, 35 years old, was struck and killed by another vehicle while riding his motorcycle during the search. Clayton was posthumously promoted to lieutenant. Lloyd was eventually found hiding in an abandoned house, armed, and wearing a bulletproof vest. He was tried separately for each murder. He got life for Dixon's killing in October 2019. He was sentenced to death for Clayton's murder on March 3, 2022. Right after Judge Letitia Marquez read the sentence, Lloyd erupted and had to be physically dragged out of the courtroom. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, youngest of 5 kids. His father was physically abusive toward the whole family, so Richard spent a lot of his time at his older cousin Miguel's house. Miguel was a Vietnam War veteran, a former Green Beret, and genuinely damaged from what he had seen. He told a young Richard stories about the rapes and violence he committed during the war, and had photographs posing with a woman's severed head. Richard was around 12 or 13 and just thought this was his cool older cousin talking. On May 4, 1973, Richard was at Miguel's home when Miguel argued with his wife and shot her in the face. Richard was 13 and in the room. Miguel was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent 4 years in a state mental hospital. Richard dropped out in 9th grade, moved to Los Angeles, and developed a serious cocaine addiction. Between June of 1984 and August of 1985, he committed at least 13 murders across the greater Los Angeles and San Francisco Bay areas. His victims ranged in age from 9 to 79. He broke in late at night, killed men quickly, and spent far longer brutalizing the women. He raped and sexually assaulted 11 people who survived, using handguns, a machete, left satanic symbols at crime scenes and forced survivors to swear loyalty to Satan. In one home, he gouged a woman's eyes out and took them in a jewelry box. In another, he dragged an 8-year-old boy around at gunpoint and told the child to swear to Satan he was not hiding money. He was captured on August 31, 1985, after residents in East Los Angeles recognized him from news broadcasts and held him until police arrived. On September 20, 1989, he was convicted on 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The jury recommended death on 19 counts, and Judge Michael Tynan formally imposed that sentence on November 7th. Leaving the courthouse, Ramirez told reporters it was no big deal. Death had always gone with the territory, and that he would see them in Disneyland. He died on June 7, 2013, from B-cell lymphoma after more than 23 years on death row. Dexter Johnson. Dexter Johnson was 18 years old, just a few days past his birthday, and a 9th grade dropout from Houston, Texas. Harris County prosecutors described him as the leader of a group responsible for at least 5 murders and dozens of robberies across a 25-day stretch in the summer of 2006. In the early hours of June 18, 2006, Johnson and 4 others were driving around Houston looking for someone to rob. They came across 23-year-old Maria Apares and her 17-year-old boyfriend, Huey Ngo, sitting together in her blue Toyota Matrix, parked just down the street from Ngo's house. Apares had come to Houston from the Philippines and was studying to become a nurse. No and his family had moved to Houston from France. They were just sitting there, talking. Johnson got out of the car with a shotgun and stood at the driver's side window. He threatened to shoot through the glass if Paris did not open the door. She did. He threw her into the back seat. No was grabbed from the passenger side and thrown in too. They drove the couple around Houston for a while, going through their belongings and using Paris's credit card at a Walmart. That Walmart transaction later showed up on surveillance footage and helped investigators identify Johnson. They eventually took the couple to a wooded area in northeast Houston. Johnson raped Paris in the backseat of her own car while No was forced to kneel outside the vehicle and listen. Afterward, Johnson and co-defendant Keithron Fields marched both of them about 60 feet into the trees. No was shot on the side of the head. Paris screamed and raised her hands to cover her face. She was shot through the top of the head. Their bodies were not found for about a week. Johnson was arrested days later on a marijuana charge and quickly linked to the crime through the footage and witness statements. In 2007, a jury convicted him and sentenced him to death. When the sentence was announced, Johnson threw a chair across the courtroom and had to be tackled by multiple sheriff's deputies. His co-defendants received sentences ranging from 25 years to life. Johnson has since had 2 execution dates blocked by federal courts on intellectual disability claims, with a neuropsychological evaluation placing his IQ at 70. Michael Madison. Michael Madison grew up in East Cleveland, Ohio, and by the time he was an adult, he had already been registered as a sex offender. In 2002, he was convicted of attempted rape and sentenced to 4 years in prison. After his release, he remained on the sex offender registry. And then, between September of 2012 and May of 2013, 3 women went missing from the East Cleveland area. Shatisha Sheely was 28 years old and had last been in contact with her family in September of 2012. Angela Deskins was 38, and her father lost contact with her around May of 2013. Sherelda Terry was 18 years old. In July of 2013, workers from a cable company noticed a foul smell coming from a garage near a building on Hayden Avenue, which was where Madison lived. Police found a large garbage bag wedged between Madison's car and the wall. Madison later told police he strangled 2 of the women but could not remember killing the third. He had reportedly told a girlfriend at the time that a smell coming from his apartment was from 2 raccoons that had died in a closet. At trial, his attorneys did not argue he was innocent. They focused entirely on trying to spare his life, presenting evidence of a deeply abusive childhood with a drug-addicted mother and multiple abusive figures in his home. The jury deliberated for less than 1 full day before returning a guilty verdict on all 13 counts. On June 2, 2016, Cuyahoga Common Pleas Judge Nancy McDonnell sentenced him to death. Right after the sentence came down, family members began coming up to address the court. Van Terry, the father of 18-year-old Sherelda, started reading his statement. He stopped mid-sentence, turned around, and launched himself directly across the courtroom table at Madison. Deputies had to wrestle him away. Terry was released without charges. His sister said afterward that he just could not take it anymore. T.J. Lane. Thomas Lane, known as T.J., was 17 years old and a sophomore when he walked into the cafeteria at Chardon High School in Chardon, Ohio, on the morning of February 27, 2012. He was there to catch a bus to Lake Academy Alternative School, which was a separate program for students considered at risk. He lived with his grandparents because his parents had been deemed unfit, and his father had a history of violent arrests involving Lane's own mother. He stood up from a cafeteria table and opened fire with a .22 caliber Ruger semi-automatic handgun. He fired 10 rounds at students he appeared to select completely at random. Daniel Parmenter, 16 years old, was killed. Demetrius Hewlin, also 16, was killed. Russell King Jr., 17 years old, was killed. Nick Waltjack, 17, was shot and left paralyzed from the waist down. Joy Rickers and Nate Mueller were both wounded and released from the hospital. Lane was chased out of the building by an assistant football coach and was arrested nearby. In the police cruiser, he was recorded saying he had shot people. When an officer asked why, he said he did not know. His attorney argued Lane suffered from hallucinations and psychosis. The judge ruled he had faked the mental illness and was actually performing well enough academically that he was on track to graduate early. On February 26, 2013, Lane pleaded guilty to all charges. So, sentencing day, March 19, 2013. Lane shows up wearing a blue button-down shirt over a white t-shirt. He sits down. Then he unbuttons the outer shirt. The white t-shirt underneath had one word written across the front in black marker: killer. Authorities later figured out he had probably written it in the middle of the night before sentencing using a rubber pen from his jail cell. When given the chance to speak, he made an obscene gesture at the victims' families and directed profane, explicit language at them. He smirked and laughed while they read their impact statements. Geauga County Judge David Fott sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 37 years. The judge noted Lane had shown zero remorse. As the sentence was read, Lane chuckled. Nico Jenkins. Nico Jenkins was first sent to prison as a teenager after being convicted of 2 armed carjackings at the age of 15. He ended up spending about 10 years locked up. While he was in there, he started telling mental health staff that he was hearing the voice of Apophis, an ancient Egyptian deity associated with chaos and destruction, and that Apophis was giving him commands to kill. A psychiatrist who evaluated him concluded he had antisocial personality disorder and was fabricating the symptoms. Prison staff flagged him as a serious danger before his release. His own family members went to authorities and pleaded with them to either keep him locked up longer or at least get him mental health treatment on the outside. Nothing was done. On July 30th, 2013, Nico Jenkins walked out of prison. 11 days later, on August 11th, he shot and killed 2 men, Juan Uribe Peña and Jorge Cajiga Ruiz, who had been sitting in a car near a park in Omaha. Both were shot in the head with a shotgun. Their wallets were taken. A female associate of Jenkins had lured them to the location. 8 days after that, Jenkins and his sister Erica shot and killed Curtis Bradford, a man Jenkins had known from prison. 4 days later, on August 23rd, he shot and killed Andrea Kruger, a 33-year-old wife and mother of 3, in an abandoned SUV at a local park. She had absolutely no connection to Jenkins. He confessed to all 4 murders during an 8-hour interview on September 3, 2013, and told investigators the killings were sacrifices to Apophis. After his arrest, Jenkins mutilated himself repeatedly while in custody. He carved the word Satan into his face. He tried to carve 666 into his forehead, but did it backwards because he was looking in a mirror. He sliced his tongue to make it look like a serpent's. He cut into his own body in a way that required 27 stitches. In May of 2017, a 3-judge panel sentenced him to death on 4 counts, plus an additional 450 years on weapons charges. When it was announced, Jenkins sat completely stone-faced and said nothing. 6 of his family members, including 3 siblings, were also convicted for their roles in the murders. Danta Wright. So, Danta Wright was 17 years old when he shot and killed 18-year-old Jordan Klee in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in what prosecutors described as an execution-style killing. Jordan was shot in the back of the head at close range on a street in Ann Arbor. He had no warning and no way to defend himself. He was 18 years old and had done nothing to provoke what happened. The two had some prior connection through mutual acquaintances, but there was no confrontation, no argument, nothing anyone could point to as a reason. Wright was charged as an adult with open murder, which in Michigan carries a mandatory sentence of life without the possibility of parole. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder instead, and the agreement was presented to 22nd Circuit Court Judge David Swartz at the sentencing hearing on January 13, 2023. And that is where things got very uncomfortable, very fast. Wright sat there smiling. He was laughing. He kept shaking his head like the whole thing was just boring to him. Judge Swartz looked at him from the bench and told him directly that watching him sit there like this was no big deal, made him very tempted to reject the plea entirely and send the case to trial, which would have meant the open murder charge and life without parole. There was a recess. Jordan Klee's family told the judge they wanted the plea accepted. They did not want a full trial. When things resumed, Wright's attorney apologized on his behalf, suggesting that some people show fear through smiling and that this was a factor in what they were seeing. After the recess, Wright spoke. He said he just wanted everyone to know he would be home soon and that he loved his family. Judge Swartz accepted the plea. Jordan Klee's mother had been standing at that podium through all of it, reading her impact statement, describing exactly what her family had lost the day her son was shot in the back of the head for no reason anyone could explain. Wright was sentenced to life in prison. He will not be eligible for parole. Deobra Redden. So most people who show up to be sentenced are nervous, right? Maybe quiet. letting their lawyer do the talking. Deobra Redden decided that was not going to be him. It was January 3rd, 2024, in Las Vegas, at Clark County District Court. Redden was there to be sentenced on a charge of attempted battery with substantial bodily harm, which sounds serious but was honestly the least alarming thing on his record at that point. His lawyer asked Judge Mary Kay Holthus for probation, said Redden was working, doing better, getting his life together. Judge Holthus went through his history out loud: 3 prior felony convictions, 9 misdemeanors, mostly violent. She told him she appreciated what his lawyer said, but it was time for him to get a taste of something else. Redden swore at her. Then he ran at the bench and launched himself over the 4-foot barrier. He landed directly on top of her, grabbed her by the hair, slammed her head into the wall, and started throwing punches. The American flag standing nearby got knocked over on top of them both. Her law clerk, her court marshal, and several others had to physically drag him off. The marshal dislocated his shoulder and needed 25 stitches. Judge Holthus was injured but was back in court the very next day. After being taken back to a cell, Redden told corrections officers he had had a bad day and had been trying to kill her. His defense pointed to his mental health. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia at 16 and had not been taking his medication at the time of the attack. In September 2024, he pleaded guilty but mentally ill to attempted murder and 5 other charges. At sentencing in December, he told the new judge he was not a bad person and had not intended to harm Holthus. Judge Susan Johnson acknowledged the mental illness but said he knew the difference between right and wrong. She sentenced him to between 26 and 65 years. He will not be eligible for parole until after 2050. Sean Great. Sean Great's parents divorced just before he turned 6. When he was 11, his mother left the family and moved to Kentucky to be with someone else. He had learning disabilities, started fires as a child, and developed a deep emotional detachment from people. He got into drugs, became a drifter, cycled in and out of abandoned buildings across northern Ohio. He was first arrested at 18 for choking a girlfriend. Between 2006 and 2016, he killed 5 women. Their names were Dana Lowry, 23 years old, killed in 2006 but not identified until 2019, Candace Cunningham, 29, Rebecca Lacey, 31, Stacey Stanley, 43, Elizabeth Griffith, 29. He was caught in September of 2016 because of one woman who survived. Great had been holding her captive in an abandoned house in Ashland, Ohio, for 3 days. He had tied her to a bed and sexually assaulted her repeatedly. While he was asleep beside her, she got hold of his phone and whispered a call to 911. She told the dispatcher she was being held near a laundromat on 4th Street and that her captor was right there, asleep, armed with a taser. Officers arrived without sirens. They arrested Great at the scene. Inside the house, police found the decomposing bodies of Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith, both strangled, hidden separately in the bedroom and basement. He was convicted in May of 2018 on 2 counts of aggravated murder and sentenced to death on June 1st. He later pleaded guilty to the remaining 3 murders in 2019 and received life sentences for each of those. Joseph McEnroe. Joseph McEnroe was 29 years old, working at a Target in Washington state, and had been dating Michelle Anderson for some time. The 2 of them were living together in a mobile home on her parents' property in Carnation, about 25 miles east of Seattle. Michelle was angry with her family. She believed her brother Scott owed her around $40,000. Her parents had taken his side, and they had recently started asking her and McEnroe to pay rent after a year of living there for free. Michelle had been quietly planning what to do about all of it for 2 weeks before Christmas. On December 24, 2007, they armed themselves and drove to the house. McEnroe distracted Judy Anderson, 61 years old, who was in the back room wrapping Christmas presents while her family was on the way. Michelle confronted her father, Wayne, 60 years old, in the living room, her gun jammed. McEnroe came in, shot Wayne, then killed Judy. They dragged both bodies to a shed behind the house, cleaned up the blood with towels and carpet, and waited for the rest of the family to arrive. Scott Anderson, 32, showed up with his wife Erica, also 32, and their 2 children, Olivia, 5 years old, and Nathan, 3 years old. Michelle shot her brother multiple times. Scott charged at her even after being hit. Both of them shot Erica, who managed to reach a cordless phone and get through to 911 before McEnroe grabbed it, pulled the batteries out, and smashed it on the floor. He then shot Erica, Nathan, and Olivia. All 6 family members were shot in the head. 16 shots were fired in total. McEnroe and Michelle drove north toward Canada, turned around, headed toward Oregon, turned around again, and returned to Carnation, appearing as though they had just discovered what happened. Investigators were already on scene. Neither of them asked a single question about what was going on. Detectives found that immediately suspicious. Both eventually confessed. McEnroe went to trial in 2015 and was convicted on all 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The jury could not unanimously agree on death, so on June 10, 2015, he was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. Chris Watts. Chris Watts lived in Frederick, Colorado, with his wife Shanann, 34 years old and 15 weeks pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy they had already decided to name Nico, and their 2 daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. On the surface, the family looked completely fine. They had a 5-bedroom home. He worked at Anadarko Petroleum, and Shanann documented their family life constantly on social media. But they had filed for bankruptcy in 2015. Money was tight, and by summer of 2018, Chris was having an affair with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger and had quietly decided he wanted out of the marriage. Shanann returned home from a work trip in the early hours of August 13, 2018. What happened next comes from the detailed confession Chris gave investigators in February of 2019, more than 6 months after his arrest. He strangled Shanann in their bedroom while both girls slept down the hall. While carrying her body downstairs, Bella and Celeste woke up and saw him. He smothered both girls with a blanket in the back seat of his truck. He then drove to the Anadarko oil field where he worked, buried Shanann in a shallow grave at the edge of the site, and pushed both daughters' bodies through 8-inch openings into separate crude oil storage tanks. He went home, called Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson to report her missing, and stood on his front lawn doing a television interview, telling reporters his kids were his life and their smiles lit up his world. He failed a polygraph 2 days later, confessed, and was arrested. The bodies were found on August 16th. He pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder on November 6, 2018. Shanann's family had asked prosecutors not to pursue the death penalty. At sentencing on November 19th, Chris said nothing at all. His attorney read a brief statement. He kept his head down while the families spoke. Shanann's father, Frank Rujic, looked directly at him and called him a heartless monster. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 84 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy and for tampering with the bodies of his children. Shanita Latrice Cunningham, Erica Mae Butts, and Shanita Latrice Cunningham. Serenity Richardson was 3 years old. Her mother, Ishia Richardson, had been close friends with Erica Mae Butts since they were children. Erica had been in the hospital the day Serenity was born and was her godmother. In late October of 2009, Ishia was in the middle of relocating from Detroit to South Carolina and needed somewhere for Serenity to stay temporarily. She trusted Erica and sent her daughter to stay with her at the home she shared with her partner, Shanita Latrice Cunningham, on Congaree River Drive in Somerville. Over the next 2 weeks, Serenity was beaten repeatedly. Prosecutors told the court the beatings were carried out with a belt and plastic coat hangers. The assistant solicitor said it was nearly impossible to describe what had been done to that little girl. There was not a single area of her body that was uninjured except for the soles of her feet. The stated reason for the beatings was that Serenity had a potty accident. On the evening of November 3, 2009, Serenity became unresponsive. Instead of calling 911, Butts and Cunningham placed her body on ice and held bleach under her nose, trying to revive her. Erica eventually called her own mother, who then called 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Serenity had already been dead for some time. Medical staff documented bruising and lacerations across her chest, stomach, legs, arms, feet, back, and head. Both women were charged with homicide by child abuse. Cunningham pleaded guilty. Butts entered an Alford plea, meaning she acknowledged a trial would likely end in conviction without directly admitting guilt. At sentencing, Butts broke down crying, turned toward Ishia Richardson sitting in the gallery, and told her she would always love her and was so sorry. Judge Dedra Jefferson sentenced both women to life in prison on November 3, 2011, exactly 2 years to the day after Serenity died. Both women collapsed to the floor, screaming and hyperventilating at the same moment. Court staff had to lift them into chairs and wheel them out of the room. Serenity's mother told the judge all she asked was for justice to be served, so her daughter could finally rest in peace. Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape. Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape were both 13 years old on the afternoon of September 17, 2012, when they showed up at the home of Barbara Olson in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin. Barbara was 78. Antonio was her great-grandson. She had helped raise him. The two boys had come with a plan and weapons to carry it out. Antonio had a hatchet, Nathan had a hammer. They wanted her money, and according to prosecutors, the motivation was partly a desire to buy marijuana and pizza. When Barbara found them in the garage, she invited them inside. She turned her back. Antonio struck her in the head with the blunt end of the hatchet. She went down, tried to cover her head, and asked them to stop. Antonio kept going. He called for Nathan, who hit her twice with the hammer. Antonio then used the sharp end of the hatchet. The medical examiner testified that Barbara Olson was struck 27 times, 18 of those blows directly to her head. They took $150 from her purse and some jewelry. They tried to drag her body to the garage but gave up. They took her car keys, drove her car to a nearby bowling alley, left it unlocked with the jewelry inside, and hoped someone would steal it and take the blame. A school paper with Nathan's name on it was found in the car. Police identified both boys within days. Both were tried as adults. Barbeau pleaded no contest. Pape was convicted at trial in June of 2013 after a few hours of deliberation. At sentencing in August of 2013, both boys cried. Barbeau broke down trying to read his apology. Pape told the court he was truly sorry and truly regretted what happened that day. Judge Timothy Van Ackeren said in 24 years on the bench he had never seen anything like it, calling two 13-year-olds bludgeoning a woman to death something out of Stephen King. Barbeau was sentenced to life, with parole eligibility in 2048 when he turns 50. Pape was sentenced to life, with parole eligibility in 2043 when he turns 45.